It wasn't just the sound, it was the feeling. That crack, sharp, unnatural, and soul-shaking, didn't just echo through the underground arena. It ripped through it. Like something sacred had been broken, and maybe it had. 1 second. The crowd was roaring, neon lights pulsing like a heartbeat. The next, silence. All eyes locked on the cage, on the body curled in agony, on the kid they'd barely noticed. Until now, Tom Reed didn't scream like a fighter. He screamed like a dreamer who just watched everything he worked for get torn apart in one brutal second. His knee shattered, his voice raw and choking in the flickering lights. Blood smeared the mat, and somewhere in that thick, copper-scented haze, a storm began to boil, not in the cage, but in the stands. Dwayne Johnson was already on his feet. He hadn't come here to fight. Not tonight, not at 53, but something about this place. It always tested his calm. The underground cage fights had always drawn a certain crowd, gritty, loud, desperate. They came for blood, not justice. But Dwayne, he came for the truth that only real combat revealed: skill, honor, respect. Tonight, though, none of those things were in that cage. What stood there instead was Luke Carter, and that damn smirk. He flexed as if he'd just knocked out a champion, but everyone with eyes saw what really happened. An illegal elbow thrown at a rookie during a moment of pause. A cheap shot, a planned one, a betrayal dressed as a victory. Luke didn't win, he stole, and Dwayne felt something rise in his chest. That slow, familiar burn, a heat he'd buried for years. He'd seen this before, the rigged fights, the bought referees, the kids like Tom getting crushed, not by better fighters, but by predators in gloves. But tonight, this time, it hit different. Because when Tom went down, when his dream broke under Luke's elbow, something else cracked too. Maybe it was Dwayne's silence. People around him were shouting, some cheering, some stunned, others throwing cash into the air, betting on the next fight as if a young man's scream wasn't still echoing across the blood-slick floor. But Dwayne didn't move. He just stared at Tom, at Luke, at the twisted justice of it all. And in that second, something unspoken passed between them, between the boy on the ground and the man in the crowd, because when a fighter falls and no one stands for him, the arena becomes a grave. But what if someone does stand? What happens when the man who's tried to walk away from violence decides not to anymore? This isn't just a story about a fight. It's about the line that got crossed, the pain that lit a fuse, and the moment a 53-year-old man with fists like thunder and a heart full of fire realized he's not done yet. Something's coming, and it's not a comeback, it's a reckoning. Stick around. You won't believe what happens next. You don't just walk into the underground arena, you fall into it. A world buried beneath a rusting warehouse where time doesn't pass. It pulses. The air inside is heavy, like it remembers every scream, every bone that snapped, every ounce of blood spilled onto its cursed mat. The light? It doesn't shine, it flickers, sickly pulsing neon that casts long jagged shadows across the walls. Shadows of men who came in with dreams and left as whispers. This place doesn't make fighters. It unmakes them. The cage in the center isn't regulation. It's a welded monster, chained corners, rusted steel, dents from knees and skulls and history. It doesn't need a spotlight. The crowd gives it all the fire it needs. Hundreds pack the edges, sweaty, furious, waving cash like war flags. Every chant, every cheer, it all builds into a living storm. And at the heart of it all, the cage breathes. Hungry. Dwayne Johnson sat in the middle of that crowd, shoulders broad, frame unmoving, but his jaw clenched like steel. He was a wall in a sea of madness, 53 years old, but built like a statue chiseled by war. His eyes didn't flinch. They scanned, measured, calculated every flicker of light, every twitch of a fighter's foot. He wasn't here for the noise. He was here for what the noise covered up. He loved the fight. Real fights, fair fights, the kind that tested heart, not just fists. But the truth, Dwayne had a flaw, one that brewed beneath the calm of his massive chest like a ticking time bomb. Injustice. He could handle pain. He could handle defeat. But cheap shots, rigged outcomes, that's where his blood began to boil. Down in the cage, before the crack, before the scream, there had been Tom. Tom Reed didn't belong in a place like this. Too young, too pure. You could see it in his eyes, nervous, darting, full of something this place hated. Hope. He stretched with purpose, hands trembling, the roar of the crowd crashing over him like a wave. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't gifted, but he had heart, and that's what made him dangerous. Every breath he took was a quiet prayer. Every jab, every bounce on the balls of his feet was a declaration. I'm not just here to survive. I'm here to fight. Just beyond the cage, barking through the chaos, stood Ben Holt, a trainer carved from leather and losses. His voice was rough, torn from years of yelling over noise just like this. "Guard up, kid," he snapped, the growl piercing through the thunder. His boots hit the concrete in rhythm, pacing like a man at war. His eyes never left Tom, not for a second. He saw the nerves, he saw the tremble. But more than that, he saw the fire. Ben had trained a lot of kids. Most didn't make it out of this cage. But Tom had something different, something that made Ben feel things he didn't want to feel. Hope. And that terrified him. Around them, the crowd exploded. Bets screamed, cash thrown in all directions. Some betting on glory, others on blood. The arena didn't care. It wanted both. Neons strobed like a warning. Chains rattled like something alive. And above it all, the scent of sweat and blood clung like a curse. Dwayne leaned forward, the tension coiling tighter. He watched Tom move, carefully, hopefully. He saw Ben's worry. He smelled the shift in the air. The arena was primed. Something was off. The kind of off that made his hands twitch, because this wasn't just another night. This was a setup, and Dwayne could feel it. He didn't know what would happen. Not yet. But the look in Tom's eyes, the way Ben's shouts cut sharper than usual, the way the crowd leaned in just a little too far, like they knew a secret. It was coming. Something was about to break. It should have been a pause, a breath, a moment between movements when both fighters reset. But in that heartbeat of stillness, when everyone let their guard down, he struck. Luke Carter didn't hesitate. He drove his elbow down like a weapon, straight into Tom Reed's exposed knee. The sound was unbearable. A sharp, wet crack that silenced the crowd for one stunned second, and then split the room wide open. Tom went down screaming. It wasn't just pain. It was the sound of a kid realizing his dream was being stolen in real time. His leg buckled, folding like paper. Blood splattered the mat. His hands clawed at the canvas as his scream pierced through the neon-lit gloom. The crowd gasped, and then, like vultures sensing carnage, they roared. Dwayne Johnson didn't move, not right away. But something inside him did. Shifted. Snapped. Across the cage, Luke Carter smiled, not out of confusion. Not because he thought it was an accident. He knew what he'd done, and he loved it. That smirk, a twisted, cocky curl of the lips, cut deeper than any elbow ever could. He didn't just win, he humiliated. After losing to Tom 3 times in training, Luke wasn't there to fight fair. He came to erase a record, with malice. Around them, chaos reignited. Some fans screamed in delight, shouting, "Finish him," like it was a movie. Others turned away, uncomfortable, unsure whether what they'd just witnessed was a win or a crime. Dwayne's fists clenched, his eyes locked on Tom, crumpled, gasping, clutching a leg that would never move the same. The cracked shin guard slid across the mat, spinning once before stopping beneath the cage light like a symbol. It gleamed for just a second, then went still, and Dwayne felt it. that familiar sting in his chest. He'd seen this before, too many times. The elbow, the scream, the rigged crowd, the smell of blood thick in the air, the cheers for a cheat. Somewhere near the cage wall, Ben Holt stood frozen, his voice suddenly quiet. The trainer, usually a storm of commands, was stone, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Dwayne with something close to a silent plea. And Dwayne, he understood it instantly, because this wasn't just one kid getting hurt. This was a pattern. Tom was just the latest. And Luke Carter, he was the face of everything wrong with this place. Cocky, protected, violent, and backed by the very crowd that should have booed him out of the building. But they didn't. They chanted, they bet more money, they laughed. Then Luke turned, looked right at Dwayne, and smirked. "Sit down, fanboy." The crowd burst into laughter. It was meant to belittle him, break him, but all it did was ignite the fire that had been building from the moment Tom hit the mat. Dwayne's jaw flexed, his shoulders rose, that slow breath before the storm. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't shaken. He was deciding, because the arena wasn't just corrupt, it was complicit. The blood on the mat wasn't just from a fight, it was from a system that let fighters like Luke rise by stepping on the backs of the honest. And tonight, in this pit of neon and noise, Dwayne was done being a spectator. A choice was forming, and it wasn't about stepping into the cage. It was about what he stood for and who he was willing to become to protect it. Dwayne Johnson had never stepped into that cage, not here, not in this arena where blood was currency and justice a joke. He came to watch. That was the line he never crossed, but tonight, that line wasn't just blurred, it was burning. He could feel it under his skin, that low, simmering pressure. The kind of anger that didn't scream, it waited. And right now, it was waiting for one more reason to erupt. The roar of the crowd swelled again, drowning Tom's sobs with a tide of greed. Cash waved in the air like war flags. Some people didn't even glance at Tom's crumpled body. They looked past him, past the blood, the pain, toward the next opportunity to bet, to profit, as if his shattered knee was just a pause between rounds. As if it didn't matter. Dwayne saw everything, not just the broken rookie on the mat, not just Luke Carter parading with that smug swagger, but the whole system, the way the crowd moved, the way the cameras ignored the cheap shot, the way nobody stepped in. This wasn't just one fighter's fall, it was a ritual, a pattern, and everyone in this room had a part in it, including him. That truth stung more than anything. He should have stood up earlier. He should have shouted. He should have, "Watch his elbows, kid." The voice snapped him out of it. Ben Holt was suddenly beside him, hand gripping Dwayne's forearm like a lifeline. His voice, low and gravelly, didn't match the chaos surrounding them. It was sharp, direct, old school. The voice of someone who'd seen too much and held too much guilt. Dwayne turned to face him, his massive frame towering over the older trainer. But Ben didn't flinch. His eyes were locked on the cage, on Luke, and somewhere in that look there was something else, a buried memory, a wound. "I trained him," Ben muttered, not looking at Dwayne. "A rookie, just like Tom, years ago. Same setup. Luke broke his arm in a clinch. Dirty move, no warning, no penalty. Kid never fought again." Dwayne didn't say a word, but his fists tightened. Ben's voice dropped even lower, almost a whisper now. "And I didn't stop it. I stood right there. And I did nothing." That silence between them said everything. This wasn't just about Tom anymore. This was about redemption, about unfinished business, about a man too old to fight, but not too old to care, passing that weight to someone who might just carry it into the ring. And Dwayne, he felt it, the shift, the burden, the question, could he really do this? "I'm no pro," he muttered, voice tight, doubt creeping into his usually steady frame. He wasn't young anymore. He hadn't trained in years. The last time he'd fought, it wasn't in a ring, it was in a street. And he lost. Bad. The bruises faded, but the laughter, That stayed. The echo of a crowd cheering your failure never really leaves you. But then he looked down. Near his boots lay Tom's cracked shin guard, a jagged piece of plastic and hope. It didn't gleam now. It glared, like it was daring him to move, to stop just watching and do something. Ben's hand pressed harder against his arm. You're not here to fight for yourself. You're here for him. That changed everything, because sometimes it's not about being ready. It's about being angry enough to stop watching kids get destroyed while the crowd cheers. It's about deciding that one dirty hit is enough, that one shattered dream is too many, that tonight, maybe the cage doesn't need another victim. Maybe it needs a reckoning, and Dwayne Johnson, he was one breath away from becoming exactly that. The decision wasn't loud. It didn't explode like a punch or crack like a bone. It whispered. In Dwayne's chest, in his gut, in that place just behind the heart where instincts live. It told him to rise, to walk, to take the first step. And so he did. His boots scraped against the concrete like a match being lit. Slow, measured, heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. He didn't rush. He didn't run. He chose each step like a man carving his own fate into the floor beneath him. The crowd didn't notice at first. They were still drunk on violence. Their eyes locked on the spectacle they thought was over, but something shifted. Maybe it was the tension in the air. Maybe it was the way the neon flickered harder, as if sensing a storm brewing inside the walls. Maybe it was the way Ben Holt stood still, his weathered face watching Dwayne move like he'd just handed him a torch, and prayed he wouldn't drop it. Then someone saw him. "Hey, he's getting up." The murmurs spread like sparks across dry timber. Whispers turned to stares. Stares turned to bets. Money began changing hands again. New names, new odds. This wasn't scheduled. This wasn't planned. And that's exactly what made it dangerous. Dwayne Johnson wasn't a fighter on tonight's card. He was a variable, and variables break systems. Luke Carter stood inside the cage, arms raised, soaking in the chaos like fuel. But when he noticed Dwayne walking forward, the smirk dipped, just enough to reveal a flicker of something beneath it. Uncertainty. "Look at you," Luke called out, his voice dripping venom. "You think you're gonna play hero? You're just a fanboy with a big jaw and a soft heart?" The crowd laughed, some in support, others unsure. The neon above the cage flared, pulsing like a living thing. The stench of blood clung thicker. Now, the air was turning. Every breath Dwayne took carried the weight of choice, not just for him, but for every kid who'd ever walked into this arena thinking heart would be enough. Every kid like Tom. He was halfway to the cage when it happened. A foot shot out. One of Luke's goons, hulking, brutal, reeking of beer and ego, stepped in front of him and slammed a boot into Dwayne's shin. Hard, dirty, cowardly. It sent a bolt of pain up his leg and dropped him to one knee. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some cheered, some jeered. Others watched in dead silence, the tension thickening like smoke. Dwayne's breath hitched. Not because of the pain, but because of what it represented. Another cheap shot. Another reminder of what he was stepping into. This wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a war. Ben Holt didn't yell. He didn't panic. He leaned in, voice low, sharp like a knife. "Get up," he growled. "He wants you down. He needs you to doubt yourself. Don't give him that." Dwayne's fingers dug into the concrete. He pushed up slowly, breath heavy, eyes blazing. Pain radiated through his leg, but the fire in his chest blazed hotter. The goon sneered, stepping back as if he'd won something. But he hadn't. He'd only made it worse. For Luke, Dwayne stood. The crowd hushed. The cage loomed ahead, a monster waiting. Rusted chains rattling softly, neon dripping across the blood-soaked mat. The shin guard from Tom's fall still lay. In the corner, a ghost of what sparked all this. This wasn't about fighting Luke anymore. It was about everything Luke represented. And Dwayne, He wasn't just stepping toward the cage, he was stepping into war. It wasn't random, it wasn't heat of the moment, and it sure as hell wasn't a mistake. The truth landed like a punch to the gut, cutting through the haze of sweat and neon. And blood. Ben Holt's voice was low, almost trembling, but sharp as glass. "Luke meant to do it," he said. "He meant to break Tom's knee." The words didn't echo. They hit. Hard. And Dwayne Johnson staggered, not from the crowd, not from pain, but from that truth. It wasn't just rage anymore. It was betrayal at a level that made your soul burn. Luke Carter hadn't just cheated a kid. He had hunted him, planned it, executed it with precision and pride. And the crowd, they never even noticed. They were too busy waving cash and yelling names to see the trap unfold. Inside the cage, Luke strutted like a king. The crowd surged again, shouting, laughing, betting louder, blind to what had really just happened. They called him a warrior. They fed his ego with every dollar, every chant, but what they were really doing was crowning a predator, a man who took pride in smashing hope under his heel. Dwayne's breath came heavy now. His frame, solid as a mountain, trembled not from fear but fury. His eyes scanned the cage, the blood-streaked mat, the cracked shin guard still shining like a cursed relic in the corner. He couldn't unsee it now, couldn't pretend it was just one bad fight. This was the rot beneath the surface, a rigged system where fighters like Luke thrived by breaking others, by design. Ben's eyes darkened. He didn't just speak next, he confessed. "I failed a rookie once," he said, his voice rough and low. "He was like Tom, full of heart, too honest for this place. Luke cheated him too, crushed his arm with a dirty hold while the ref looked the other way, and I did nothing." His face, lined with regret, turned toward Dwayne. "Not this time." That admission hung in the air like smoke, wrapping around Dwayne's chest, making it hard to breathe. But also impossible to look away, because that wasn't just regret, it was a plea for redemption, for justice, for someone to finally do what no one else had the guts to. The crowd roared again. A chant rippled. "Carter's king!" The words felt wrong now, twisted, like a lie being repeated so loud people might actually start believing it. But not Dwayne, not anymore. He looked back at Tom, still crumpled off stage, clutching his leg, face ghost pale, hope drained from his eyes. That image burned into his memory. Tom's pain wasn't an accident. It was a message, a warning to every rookie. Don't rise too fast, don't shine too bright, or you'll be broken, silenced, erased, but not tonight. Dwayne's fists clenched tighter, his stance straightened. The cracked shin guard flashed in his mind, not as a symbol of defeat, but of defiance. That wasn't just Tom's protection, it was his dream, crushed, but not forgotten. He took another step toward the cage. This time without hesitation. The noise around him faded into a blur, the lights dimmed behind his eyes. There was only one thing in focus now. Luke Carter. Not the showman. Not the crowd favorite, the cheater, the coward. The snake in fighter's skin who thought he could keep doing this forever. Dwayne didn't need to say a word. His body spoke for him. His silence roared louder than the crowd. And the look in his eyes, it wasn't anger anymore. It was purpose. The cage didn't wait. It never did. It loomed like an animal behind bars, rattling chains, soaked in blood, humming with the memory of every scream it had swallowed whole. And now, it wanted more. But tonight, it wasn't calling for a victim. It was calling for Dwayne Johnson. The crowd didn't know what to make of it yet. Some thought it was a stunt, others whispered about revenge. But deep down, everyone felt it. That shift in the air, that low vibration in their chests, like thunder before a storm. The arena was changing. Not because a new fight was starting, but because the right one was. Dwayne approached the edge of the cage like a man stepping onto holy ground. Not fast, not flashy, but unstoppable. The spotlight didn't follow him. He brought it with him. And in his eyes, no rage, no panic, just a stillness, the kind of calm that comes before something burns. But Luke Carter was already inside, and he saw it coming. That smirk still danced on his face, but it was different now. Less triumph, more tension. He paced, flexed, tried to laugh it off. "He's just a fan," he barked to the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at him, old, slow, full of TV muscles. He doesn't belong in here." Some fans laughed. Some didn't. Luke pointed, jeering. "This cage doesn't care about your Hollywood dreams, Grandpa." But Dwayne didn't flinch. He stepped through the ropes like he'd done it 1,000 times, and maybe in another life he had. Each boot hit the blood-soaked mat like a war drum. The lights above flickered, the noise thinned. Even the smell, sweat, blood, fear seemed to pause. Time had found its center, and it stood 6'5", carved from stone, eyes locked on the man who shattered Tom Reed's dream. Ben Holt pushed through the crowd, voice rising in that gravelly pitch. "Low kicks, aim for the knees," he growled, slipping a crumpled paper into Dwayne's fist, a scribbled game plan born from decades of regret. His hands trembled, not with fear, with belief. This was it. Dwayne didn't speak, didn't nod. He just tightened his grip. On the paper, on the moment, on the fury he'd kept buried since Tom screamed. But then, as if on cue, Luke's men closed. In again. One of them, bigger than most, sweat gleaming on his forehead, took a step toward the cage's edge. "He's done!" someone shouted. "Carter's got this!" The betting slips flew. Wads of money exchanged hands like weapons, and then another hit. A goon's fist grazed Dwayne's shoulder just as he turned. A cheap shot. Nothing serious. But it didn't need to be. It was meant to shake him, to remind him he wasn't welcome here, that this cage didn't belong to justice. It belonged to power. Dwayne stumbled, catching the edge of the ropes. His body ached, his shins still burned. The crowd surged with fresh noise, laughing, screaming, chanting. "He's too old! He's all show!" And for one brief second, the doubt crept back in. But that's when he saw it. The shin guard, Tom's, cracked, scuffed, still lying in the corner of the cage, untouched since the fall. It wasn't just gear. It was a ghost, a symbol. A silent scream from a fighter who never got to finish his story. Dwayne's hand tightened again, not around the ropes, but around his will. The fire came back, sharper, hotter, no longer fueled by anger, but purpose. He stepped forward, one more step, then another. The goons didn't follow. They watched, because they knew. The cage had finally welcomed someone it couldn't break. Not tonight, not Dwayne. The mat was slick with old blood and new tension. Neon lights hissed overhead like venomous serpents, bathing everything in that eerie, electric glow. Chains along the cage walls rattled with every movement, as if the arena itself was alive, waiting for something, no, someone, to finally break the cycle. And now, Dwayne Johnson stood at the center of it. Luke Carter smirked across from him, still full of swagger, still convinced this was just another show. But something about Dwayne's silence made the crowd pause. This wasn't the same man who'd walked in. This wasn't a fan anymore. This was a reckoning with fists. The bell never rang. There was no ref to mediate, no cameras to mark it, just two men, and the ghosts of every fighter who had bled here before. The crowd leaned forward. Ben Holt stood just outside the cage, lips pressed tight, fists clenched like he was the one about to fight. And somewhere in the shadows, Tom Reed watched through pain-narrowed eyes, his body broken, but his spirit now burning brighter than ever. Then the first strike landed. Dwayne moved like a man possessed, not by rage, but by purpose. His leg shot. out low and fast, catching Luke's left knee with a brutal roundhouse. The sound echoed, a clean, sharp pop. Luke staggered. The crowd gasped, and Dwayne didn't pause. He pivoted, dropped low, and slammed another kick into the other knee. Another crack. Luke dropped to one side, groaning, the smirk now twisted into something far more human. Fear. But it wasn't over. Luke lunged wildly, throwing an elbow, the same kind he'd used to end Tom's dream. It grazed Dwayne's cheek, blood flicking across the mat. The sting meant nothing. What mattered was what came next. Dwayne ducked, twisted, and delivered a spinning back kick straight into Luke's weakened leg. The scream that followed wasn't a sound the crowd had ever heard from their so-called king. Luke collapsed, legs folding under him like broken scaffolding. His hands clawed at the mat. He looked up, eyes wide, lips trembling. The arena had never seen him this way, exposed, pitiful, begging without words. Dwayne stood over him, chest heaving, blood trickling from his cheek. His fists clenched. The crowd fell into a stunned silence, as if waiting for him to finish it, to crush Luke, to end it the way so many fights here always ended, in destruction. But he didn't move. Instead, Dwayne looked past Luke, to the shin. Guard in the corner, Tom's, the broken one, the reminder of what this was really about. He lowered his fist, not because Luke didn't deserve it, but because he didn't need it. This wasn't about vengeance anymore, it was about honor, and as the neon flickered and the cage groaned, the crowd slowly began to chant, not for Luke, not for blood, but for something they hadn't seen in years. Dwayne. Dwayne. The cage had taken much, but tonight it gave something back, a moment of truth. Tonight wasn't just about a fight, it was about a vow, a promise to every underdog who ever got crushed by corruption, a silent promise that someone will stand up, and tonight it was him. The cage didn't just witness a battle, it witnessed a shift, from greed to honor, from silence to action. And whether you felt anger, hope, or just something stirring deep in your chest, this story matters. If this story moved you, like this video, if you've ever wanted to stand up for someone, share this with a friend. And if you believe in stories where justice rises, subscribe and drop a comment. Who would you fight for? Because sometimes justice doesn't wear gloves. It wears conviction.